Hemingway walked through old Havana and along the Malecon in the early morning mist, awakened an interest in the city which never left him. The hospitality he received on that first visit initiated a love affair with the island. He would be drawn to it again and again over the next 11 years, until he finally took up residence there in 1939. His reputation preceded him. The feeling in the States was that he'd invented a new way of seeing.
Like Cézanne, Hemingway not only worked out a new way of setting things down, but far more important, he worked out a new way of looking at things before setting them down. It's no trick to copy the Hemingway style. It's almost as easy to duplicate it as it is to parody it. But it is the trick of a lifetime to duplicate the method of seeing with the Hemingway eye for significant and selective detail, to achieve the all-important pattern, which is the essence of the strip's style.
Now he was returning from the corrupt values of Europe to the place where he'd gone on expeditions with his father amongst the Indians of Illinois, and together they'd happily immerse themselves in nature at its most primitive. Having won its independence and survived a bloody civil war, America had come of age. Now it was boldly challenging the European presence in what it considered to be its own backyard. Instead of the United States entering Cuba as liberating heroes, they were rather treated as usurpers of a battle half won by Cuba's war heroes. Within a couple of years, the Americans had invested in a massive system of railroads linking the country's commercial centers. American businessmen bought up at least 3/4 of the island's industries, rapidly acquiring Cuba's sugar plantations and cigar factories. As a direct result of the destruction of the European beet fields during the Great War, the price of Cuban sugar soared and money rolled into Havana. There followed a construction explosion that was to transform the capital, returning it to its former Caribbean glory. The wealth generated by American business benefited the Cuban elite, but it didn't filter down to the people struggling to survive in the country. The descendants of the recently emancipated slaves saw little, if any, of the benefits brought by this explosion of modernization. The world sugar market had always been the economic barometer for the island. In the early 1920s, the world prices were slashed. Cuba's student population responded to the economic instability, making their voices heard in a wave of protests from the universities. While corrupt politicians and mobsters hatched deals in hushed tones in the lobby. The huge division between the wealthy and the poor meant that the majority of the population lived in desperate poverty, from which there was no release. The country was constantly on the brink of social collapse. This stark reality did not stop tourists from enjoying the party that was being celebrated in Havana day and night, making it one of the world's most sophisticated cities and a byword for hedonism. This was the divided Cuba Hemingway returned to in 1931, with his new wife Pauline and the 2 sons she had borne him. The move was probably a reaction to a disturbing tragedy that had shaken the family. While Hemingway had been happily raising his family in the Florida Keys, his father ended his own life, blowing his brains out with a shotgun. Memories of this event put a fuse in Hemingway's mind with thoughts of his own brush with death in World War I, fueling a lifelong obsession with mortality. From that moment on, he was to become a man of action, passionate about fishing, big game hunting, and bullfighting. he was drawn to dangerous revolutionary flashpoints around the world. This, combined with his interest in primitive cultures, provided fertile ground for developing his existential vision. He believed an author should have direct experience of his subject. When writing, he chose to stand before his typewriter. He loved women, and drink played an increasingly important part in his life.
What is moral is what you feel good after, and what is immoral is what you feel bad after.
Cuba was to offer him plenty of opportunities to exercise this brand of morality. At the Ambos Mundos, the Both Worlds Hotel, Hemingway was to spend this period writing to have and have not. When he'd finished working, often late at night, he would roam the neighborhood, and in the years that followed, he was to carouse with the best of them, familiarizing himself with Havana's bars and the seedy underbelly of Havana's nightlife. While Havana lived the high life, inevitably resistance to the tyrannical Machado increased. The first Communist Party in Cuba led strikes in Havana and took over the precious sugar plantations and farms in the Cuban heartlands. With the onset of worldwide depression, sugar prices crashed, and in the summer of 1933, a successful general strike took place. As the rival factions smoldered, Machado's administration called a special session of the Cuban Congress to place the republic under martial law. The heavy-handed retaliation by his forces could not, however, stem the tide of revolution. Machado was forced to flee, paving the way for the arrival of a new regime. Fulgencio Batista, a sergeant in the Cuban army, arose out of the chaos. Staging a military coup, he assassinated most of the old guard, replacing them with officers whose loyalty he could rely on. He promoted himself to colonel, lending his military weight to a grotesque parade of puppet rulers who ran the country over the next few years. Batista remained the powerhouse behind the scenes. He realized early on that he could count on U.S. support for his actions as long as he continued to maintain American interests on the island. It would be unjust, however, to describe Batista as a mere servant of the American government. He was a Cuban who won the loyalty of many of his fellow countrymen, introducing a progressive constitution and strengthening the Cuban labor movement. There are those who argue that during the early years of his rule, he may have empowered the cause of Cuban independence.